Afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Rodgers Reidy's next Accounting Symposium. Our first one for 2022. Wow, everything has gone very, very quickly. It was only a couple of years ago we started our webinars, and I stood in front of a computer and we would have lots and lots of people viewing us from home. Now we're out in the open, and we've actually got people in person here today. So we have a lovely selection of people that you won't get to see, but they're in the background who have attended. Yeah, there's a bit of noise. Thank you. We have 200 people attending electronically here today. So great numbers to attend our first webinar for 2022. And I think really it's a reflection of our speakers. We've got three great speakers today. We'll talk on varying subjects, so we're looking forward to it. I didn't mention, my name is Brent Morgan. I'm a director at Rodgers Reidy. For the people who don't know about Rodgers Reidy is an international insolvency firm. We are Australia's only truly national firm. We have offices in Darwin and Tasmania and Perth, which our competitors don't. So we're very proud of that. Just a quick update on where things are at. Things are just evolving in our marketplace. It's still quiet. You would probably see, if anything, a little bit more of the larger insolvencies that have sort of started to happen. We've had ProBuild, which happened recently. We're hearing lots of talk about lots of distress in the building and construction industry. And that's no surprise because of all the reasons that hurt those industries coming into play. But we are hearing a number of those, are in financial distress. So there's more of those to come. The market is seeing ATO starting to put a bit more pressure on. So the ATO have grown their, distress book to over $60 billion, and with that, it sort of started in the teens before COVID happened in late 2019 and early 2020. The book has just grown tremendously. That is starting to change. There is a lot more pressure. The director's penalty notices are coming out. We're starting to see garnishes also happening, and we've spoken to a number of the lawyers who are on the ATO recovery panel, and they've said that they've started to get files directly from the ATO for enforcement. So, and that will filter through. Accountants will get busier in the sense that their clients will come to them and look for solutions for the issues. And more than ever, which I'll get to, which is what we're going to speak on at our last speaker, Cassandra, is just in relation to doing deals. The tax office are here to do deals, and we'll talk about the small business restructuring regime, which came into place last year, and the ATO are doing some great deals, so that's really needed. Last thing before we sort of get on to our first speaker, Mark Ellis. Mark Ellis has been with us for a number of years. Mark Ellis has just been made a director of the firm. He is one of our forensic partners. We now have a substantial site forensic litigation support practice. Mark became a director a couple of weeks ago, and we're excited. It was a time for him, and I think if you haven't met Mark before, put it on your list to do, because Mark is very good at what he does. Anyway, we'll get on to our first speaker. As I've said to the first speaker today, I won't mention his wife. I think we learned our lessons from yesterday. There won't be any digs about his wife or any, and I know his wife, she's lovely, but I won't be making any comments. But our first speaker is Brent Szalay. Brent's going to speak on accountants' future. There's been some big changes in Brent's life in the last couple of months. He is a managing director of Seiva Advisory, and what's happened in the last couple of months, he's now the president of the Victorian Divisional Council of the CPAs. So I'd say a lot of our people who are watching today who are CPAs would know of Brent. He's someone who we use and we like, it was a matter of time that he was going to be the president, because he's just, excellent at what he does. So we've got Brent talking today about the future of the accounting industry and what trends we're having. So I welcome Brent to come and have a chat to us. So thank you, Brent. Just in relation to questions, if you have any questions, particularly online, type away. They're going to have lots of questions about, your talk today, Brent, I'm sure.
Well, I hope so.
Yeah.
Lots of questions. I like to leave people with questions, not answers.
Yeah. So if you have any questions, type them away, and just at the end of Brent's presentation, we'll answer them. Excellent. Yeah. Thanks, Brent.
I was just looking for a footstool. Even if I wanted to give you a slap, I don't think I'd be able to read. Anyway, if that's big Brent, I'm certainly small Brent. But we'll kick on. So look, thank you for the introduction, and thanks for having me. I think it's fantastic that you run these events. 200 people online is a fantastic turnout. So great to be part of it. And I think Rodgers Reidy doing a great job building network and connection. Let's be honest, who would have thought that we're standing in a room full of people and then having 200 people online? It's such a different environment that we're used to. There's certainly been a shift in our normal. So look, my discussion today is, a quick chat just to, I suppose, give you some insight. I'd like to just share with you my role at CBA as the president of the Divisional Council. And maybe to start with how it started for me, I am an accountant that started out and was asked onto a committee at CPA Australia. And I didn't have any idea what it was and what it meant, but it was a public practice committee, and we'd represent the public practitioners out there. And for me, I went in there wide-eyed, but I didn't know what the richness was about being connected to my association. So fast forward all our years now, I look back and go, geez, I've got a lot out of that. The people I've met, the opportunities it's been for me, but it's helped build my practice, my skills, my knowledge, my networks, and it's been a tremendous experience. So getting to today now, it's given me an opportunity to be the president of the Divisional Council, which is, for me, it's such an honour, to be honest. It really is. Such a big organisation, and they're doing such a lot of things. So I'll give you a bit of insight as to how that works there, and I'll share with you a little bit about the strategy that's going on with the board at the moment, which gives us a bit of insight to the future of the profession, which is interesting. So firstly, look, our role, Divisional Council, is a member. What's the right word when you vote? It's voted in role for the members, and so it's a privilege. But then when you get to the council, we sort of meet every sort of month, and we're trying to focus on our role really to represent the members and try to listen to what's going on in the industry, connect with our membership on the ground, and trying to feed that back through to the board, essentially, to help make decisions. Okay, so the sort of areas we're focusing on is really connecting through some channels. The first one is our discussion groups. There's about 80 discussion groups throughout Victoria. Now, what that means, I think, for people watching and listening is that there's opportunities to connect. I think if you're trying to grow your networks, the discussion groups at CPA Australia are pretty rich. They're all over, and it gives you a chance to try to build out your networks, come and talk, and come and broaden your networks and introduce yourself to more people. I think that's a great part of the network. So certainly we're trying to connect with that. We're trying to connect with our branches and committees more, which is, through the public practice where I started. We've got a great session up in Lawn coming up. There's 300 accountants. Brent's going to come down and have a chat. John's been down there. And connecting through our women's committee who run fantastic events, and really trying to touch base with our regions and things like that. So it really is a members-based sort of role. And I think during COVID, it's been really difficult to go out and see a lot of our members and our people. But now I think these opportunities present itself again. So it's really exciting. I suppose the last role is to try to represent our next generation coming through. Okay, there's a real issue now of what does an accountant look like? What does an advisor look like in this world? There's certainly not a sexy sort of title as it's first been known, but I believe there's certainly some sexy things happening and some great things happening that we need to tell that story a whole lot better. So we're sort of passionate about that. The last role I have as the president, other than those things, is there's a new committee formed to advise the board, which is around that Council of Presidents, which is throughout all the presidents, the 13 presidents throughout Australia, New Zealand, Asia and Europe, we meet once a quarter to discuss and hear from the board and give them strategic advice back to how our members could be looking at some of the things they're working on. So for me, that's exciting and it's great for me. But I think the most important link to all of this is that this year for CPA Australia is a strategy year. So what they're doing right now is resetting their direction for the next 5 years, and they're co-designing that direction with its members. Okay, so it's pretty interesting. Going back to the members and seeking their input. Okay, so they're running workshops for the next few months, going out there, breaking up into groups, asking questions, trying to get the right strategy to move forward so they're getting full buy-in from their members, which I think is a fantastic thing for any organisation to do. The question of why, what's the issue we're trying to address here with the strategy? Well, the biggest problem that I see, despite all the stats and things like that, is that there is a real shortage right now of people going through university to become an accountant, a big shortage. Okay, so if you think that through, what that means, some of you now may be privy to some of the shortages that are happening in our businesses now, and it's tough. But what do you do if you don't have people? You know, it's crazy. We're getting insight into that now. We can't actually grow. We can't actually attend to our members. So that's the number one problem I think that the board are trying to attend to, and how they can attract more people into our industry so we can have, I suppose, more members, but I suppose me with my Seiva hat on now, as an employer, having more people. Okay, so that's the biggest challenge I think. So what does that mean for me? So the first thing is I put my Seiva hat on now as I'm an employer. So I want to hire people. And there's a real threat to our industry that's happening now with less people. I don't know about you guys, but there seems to be more work than ever before. So we really need to have a plan around what we're going to do about that. Okay, because that's certainly an issue. There's a real gap emerging. I suppose a couple of things we can do about that. Firstly, just to acknowledge this for me is that we are now, look, this room is as an example of that. We are experiencing a change, I think, that we've never going to experience before. I think the sooner we acknowledge that and move past that is something that we need to do. Okay, we can't expect to go back to the way things used to be. And I believe, this is with my Seiva hat on loud and proud now, I think we've just got to really understand, from my perspective, that the employees really have a lot of power. Okay, and if we're not looking after our people and our team and building an organisation that can harness people to be able to develop, they're going to have many choices. Okay, and it puts us behind the 8 ball. And for me, designing that outcome as a business to be able to cater for that is something that I think we can all start to work on immediately, because I believe it's going to become a competitive advantage. Okay, it's not just about hiring people, it's about hiring great people. And if there is a shortage, of course, we're going to look at other ways to do things, using technology to streamline. A lot of people still offshoring and things like that. But our people are still the prime service-based industry. How are we going to cater for that? Okay, that's really challenging. And I believe that that's something we can start working on immediately. So capturing the mind, becoming an employer of choice, I think is something we can do to negate this big problem that's currently here, and I think will just continue on. Looking at how to build flexibility and choice for our people, and really about trying to change it. It challenges us to be better at what we do. Okay, we're not just no longer rocking up and getting on the clock about how many hours we work. It's about what's the result we're looking for and designing a job role around that, so we're comfortable that anybody in the world can work for us. And are we comfortable hiring people from anywhere? I know from our perspective, since COVID, we've hired someone from Merimbula, from Warragul, from Bendigo. It's enabled us to be able to have a broader network of people and it's forcing us to improve to cater for that. That's what it's demanding. So for me, that's attending to going back to the strategy of CPA. Certainly the biggest gap that I see in the problem in our industry now is attending to our people and how we can capture our people in our own work, in our own business, to be able to attend to that. So just finally, I think the couple of things I'd like to sort of finish off on. The first thing is what I learned about the CPA strategic session with the board. You know, it's such a big organisation. They're going through almost 12 months of designing their strategy and engaging as many people as we can, okay, as they can. And I think that's a great lesson to learn for all of us in terms of designing your outcome that you're trying to get and trying to take the time to get it done properly and engage with the right people to be able to contribute to that. It's going to give you more chance of success. So that's the first thing. And the other thing is really about the connection. Okay, I think it's a great opportunity to connect with people within your professional association. You know, lawyers and accountants, I think, are mainly made up of the audience. Like, connecting back to your professional association gives you tremendous benefits and opportunities. And it's not just knowledge and skills; it's networks, it's people, and it's ongoing. And I'd urge you to get involved with that, because going in there with eyes wide open, with no expectation, I can really look back after 9 or 10 years of doing that, saying it's helped me tremendously. And I'm really, really privileged to be in the position that I am. Time's probably up there, but that's it from me. I'm happy to answer any questions if there's any questions there, Brent. But otherwise, yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Brent. There are some questions. You can't run away that quickly. Wearing your Seiva hat. I mean, everything you said before about people and the challenges we have. What are you doing to create a different workplace to get the best people and to keep the best people that you've got?
It's a good question. Like, we're certainly going back. Our core strategy when we started Seiva is if we can get internal quality, then people will want to come and work for us. So it's really about designing a role and a place and a culture, mainly around our values. Like, our values are really clear around, we really love helping people. So we've got to hire people that love helping people. So we're aligning with our people. That way we're negating the type of people that we could de-risk the chance of getting the wrong people to start with. But beyond that, really it's about having a clear direction of the firm, where you're going, and sharing that with the team. That communication is absolutely clear because they can then picture themselves on that journey. And then we talk to them about, how do you want to be involved with this? What are you motivated by? And we talk to them about that and give them the opportunity to contribute. Okay, that alignment goes a long, long way, because you're both then working in the same direction. And again, you've got to have the ability to go back and feedback and communicate along the way. The things such as the softer things, we try to make our nice office, nice amenities and things like that. They're great, but that's not the reason why people are staying or coming. But they're just things that make the experience of working at our place a great place to be. So it's a whole range of things, but they're the two things I'd say is get a clear direction where you're going, talk about it passionately, and get them on board of what they want to contribute, and they will stay the long road to try to see it out with you, as long as they can see themselves in that picture. And
the CPAs, have they got a vision about the working from home? We're forced for the last couple of years to to be that our main focus, that people were working at home. Things are changing, things are opening up, and people can work, but there is a drive to have a mix. Is it the CPAs? Are they assisting? Because it's a big change. It is, even for them themselves. I mean, because they're structured like a corporate in a way. They're such a big organisation. They're only literally going back to the office themselves now. So they've been working this whole 2 years alone. In terms of supporting their members, look, I don't think anybody. They're certainly getting people in to come and contribute their thoughts and ideas. I think everyone's still trying to work it out, but it's certainly at the forefront of an issue that we need to deal with in terms of trying to make people feel more comfortable with flexibility, okay, and building that trust that, it can actually work. I think that's the continual message, that people just need to sit their toe in the water and continue on. And I think the continual discussion with that, it's taken away from us now, I believe. And I think, the more we can continue to learn and hear people doing it well, share some of the things that aren't working well, I think it's inevitable that we're already there, and they're certainly having that as a topic of discussion. Yep. Last question that someone had was, can you create culture with staff working from home? It's hard. It's harder, yep. But you can. Again, we find that there's certainly, we build our business on culture, and how do we maintain connection? I just think the way we've done it in the past, where we think we have to go in every single day, is the way that we need to maintain culture, but we don't.
okay, we can be clear on what we're doing, maybe touch base once a week, twice a week, or even once a month, twice a month, depending on your organisation, and reconnect as a group again. And that might be in a different format. Okay, that might be in a session where you spend a whole half day together, doing some connection activities or problem-solving activities to embrace that team-building exercises. But I do believe it's harder for us personally. We want to try to encourage people to come in a couple of days a week on the same day, and then outside of that, people are flexible to what they want to do.
Right.
Because it's not just the culture that people that we need to actually try to maintain or enhance. It's also just the ability to get work finished. I find that there's certain parts of the job that can be the last little bit that matters, that is hard to get onto a Zoom call and say, hey, where are we at with that? And I find that that's the hard bit. But the connection when people come in, I think, is great. And we just continue to have activities beyond our work week that will give people the opportunity to build relationships, build rapport outside of work, which they'll then bring back into work.
Excellent. Thank you, Brent.
No worries,
Thank
mate.
you very much.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. Last thing, Brent, is the suit and tie gone?
Yeah, we said come casual, so I've been in a t-shirt for the last 4 months, so this is
and shorts
up and shorts.
Yeah. That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Everyone says I'm old-fashioned by wearing a jacket in time. Hard to change. Now, moving. One of the things I suppose people will notice is that Brent has spoken to our group a number of times over the years, and our next person has spoken to our group a number of times as well, but in a different guise. Expert in he's a lawyer and expert in taxation affairs and structuring and guiding a number of your clients, because I'd say that, and I'm aware that a lot of the people we have here today have used John Storey's expertise over the years, but he's changed. He's on a bit of a sabbatical. And this is what we're talking about today. We're talking about the World Security Update, and no sort of better time to talk about it. The book was written when, John? Before you
published in November, so it's only a few months on.
And no better time to talk about what we're coming through at the moment. You're a soothsayer.
I really thank Vladimir.
Vladimir, yes, that's right.
Do me a favour.
Yeah, he gets cut, doesn't he? Yeah, so look, John's been on our webinars and symposiums over the years, but predominantly as a tax lawyer. But we've got him here for different purposes today. He is the author of Big Wars, which you see here. They're all good bookshops and online, but you can tell everyone about that. Now, why do they happen, and when is the next one? That might be, did you have to change it in the last couple of months?
I know, it's all panning out exactly.
Can you tell me exactly what it is? I'll make sure I don't do any international travel then. So look, we're blessed, very blessed once again to have John Storey here today and talking on his change and his book, and then he can just tell us about what we're heading into. John, thank you.
Yeah, Brent thought it might be good to mix this up with all the international developments to have a bit of a security update. So the initial plan was to talk about the Ukraine war, but based on my Twitter feed, the latest international outrage is whether or not Will Smith had the right to punch Chris Rock. So I'll deal with that and I'll wrap up with the Ukraine stuff. Just joking. So I thought I'd try to, and very briefly, from a historical perspective, see if I can shed some light on 3 questions. How did this war in Ukraine happen? How's it going to pan out? And what does it mean to you? So from a historical perspective, I'll start with a little analogy. We've all heard the saying, lightning never strikes the same place twice. You know, basically means the world is chaotic and unpredictable. When it comes to man-made disasters like war and genocide and man-made famines and the like, that's not the case. Lightning does strike twice quite regularly. The world disasters are not evenly distributed across the world. There's not an equal chance of a civil war or a genocide in beautiful Melbourne here than there is in Afghanistan. And if you had to pick a place in the 20th century where there was the most chance of being caught in a war zone, the most chance of being subject to a genocide, or the most chance of being subject to a man-made famine or disaster, it would be the Ukraine. It has been the epicenter of 2 world wars, the epicenter of the worst civil war in the 20th century, the Russian Civil War, and has been the target of 2 of the 3 great genocidal monsters of the 20th century, Stalin and Hitler. And just when they thought they may have gotten over that, it was also the scene of the worst nuclear disaster, Chernobyl. So why does this keep happening to the Ukraine? Well, Ukraine is very flat. You've been seeing the footage. There's not a lot of mountains. It's very flat. It's effectively a highway between Europe and Asia. So if Genghis Khan intends to do some raping and pillaging in Eastern Europe, it's got to go through Ukraine. If Hitler intends to do some raping and pillaging in Moscow, he has to go through Ukraine. So this has been one of those fault lines in world history. And if you had to guess with no other knowledge than just what I told you then, where's the Third World War likely to start or likely to be fought? High on your list should have been Ukraine or people in Ukraine. So how is this going to pan out? Well, in my book, Big Wars, available in all good bookshops, great for kids.
Online as well, can you?
Online, yes. I'll wrap that up.
Yeah.
I talk about trends in history, including trends since the Second World War. There are really 2 key trends. There's sort of been 2 types of war since the Second World War. One is what we call conventional warfare. So that is wars between nations and the modern armies of nations. So that's what's happening in Ukraine. Russia invading Ukraine, 2 nations fighting it out. The other type of war is what I call in my book guerrilla warfare, but basically civil war, insurgencies, terrorism, that sort of thing, where it's not organised armies, it's generally insurgency operations to undermine a government or 2 such organisations clashing with each other. The 2 trends are as follows. With conventional wars, since the end of the Second World War, they've become fewer, they become much shorter, and they become quite rare. That's part of the reason why this is such a shock. It's like a nation invading another nation. Well, during the Second World War and prior to the Second World War, that was all the time. That's what nations did. That's the purpose of having an army, was to invade someone. It's become quite rare, and that's why this is such a shock. And the wars have become really short. I mean, if you look at history, there were international wars like the 30 Years' War or the 9 Years' War or the 7 Years' War. The 20th century gave us the 6 Days' War. They become extremely short. Guerrilla warfare is complete opposite. They become far more numerous and they take forever. We've just had one end in Afghanistan, 20 years. So there's a few reasons for these trends. I'll just explain one. One is the destructiveness and the cost of modern weapon systems. So in the Second World War, the weapons that the armies were using, the tanks and planes and stuff, were pretty simple and pretty easy to manufacture. So in 1944, for example, Germany's cities were being bombed into rubble, and they still produced tens of thousands of tanks, tens of thousands of aircraft. So they were able to continue fighting for years and years and years. Just to give you some comparisons with modern weapon systems. So the main fighter of the American Air Force on their aircraft carriers in World War II was the F-6 Hellcat. America produced 12,000 of them during the war. The main fighter during the Cold War was the F-14 Tomcat. This is the plane that Tom Cruise uses in the movie Top Gun. Its entire development was produced for 30 years, and in total, America produced 900 of them. They're incredibly expensive. They cannot be replaced quickly. Another example, the top American aircraft at the moment, F-22 Raptor. The entire production history of that aircraft was the equivalent to 2 hours of aircraft manufacture during the Second World War. So what happens in modern conventional wars is both sides hammer at each other and they run out of equipment, and the war has to come to a speedy end. In 1965, there was a war between India and Pakistan, 2 weeks, and both sides lost about half their tanks. They had no ability to replace them. The war had to come to an end. In 1973, there was a war in the Middle East between Israel, Syria, and Egypt. Both sides lost about half their tanks, half their aircraft, and they consumed all their munitions. The only reason the war could go as long as it did, which is about 3 weeks, was because the Soviet Union and America shipped in replacements to support their side. Modern wars are over quickly. So what does this mean? Well, I think we're seeing this in the Ukraine at the moment. The front lines are ground to a halt. There is talk that Russia may have lost 25% of its combat capabilities, that it may only have 1 or 2 weeks left of logistics in order to mount offensive operations. I think that it's going to grind to a halt pretty soon, and historically that's about right. It's been going for about a month. It might drag on a little longer. So then what? Well, there's a couple of different options what happens at that stage. The first one is that it becomes a guerrilla insurgency. So 2 things about that. Firstly, I mentioned they take ages. Some people are talking about turning Ukraine into Afghanistan. Well, that's going to be Ukrainians and the world. The second thing is the history of insurgencies against foreign occupiers since the 20th century, 100% successful. No foreign occupier who's faced a guerrilla insurgency has survived. All the European empires left. America left Vietnam. The Russians left Afghanistan. America left Iraq. They never succeed. They take a long time. Sometimes they can take a damn long time, and it's not pleasant for people engaged in the war, but it doesn't bode well for the Russians if that's the case. Another option is that the war could just become a stalemate. Neither side has the capabilities, the tanks, the aircraft or anything to mount offensive, so it just stabilises. Think of like the trench warfare of the First World War. There have been 2 conventional wars since the Second World War, which have just ended in a similar stalemate. First was the Korean War in the 50s, where there was a year of aggressive offensives either way, and then it ground to a stalemate. There was 2 years of the front lines didn't go anywhere. I think a more relevant example would be in the 1980s, the Iran-Iraq War. That was a war where both sides started with pretty decent armies, pretty modern equipment. That all got exhausted in a month, and the front lines stabilised, but the war didn't over. No one was willing to call a truce. And so they dug trenches, barbed wire. It turned into something like the First World War. And we might be seeing a little bit of that in Ukraine. These cities are suddenly becoming entrenched and no one seems to be going anywhere. There is a third option, so insurgency is an option, stalemate or escalation. Escalation is the other option. Do other countries get involved? Do more severe weapons get used, such as nuclear weapons? So I think the next couple of weeks will be really important. I think that the conventional phase will come to an end. If some sort of truce that's more or less acceptable to each side is arranged, we might be able to move on. But all the other options are going to be pretty ugly. A long guerrilla war, stalemate, or escalation. Are not pretty. So what does this mean for you? Well, it does. It means a lot for every one of us. It was pretty obvious beforehand, but it's now abundantly clear that we're now in Cold War II. And the fault lines of this new Cold War are being drawn. On the one side, there is a loose alliance of authoritarian powers, Vladimir Putin's Russia, Xi Jinping's China, the Ayatollahs of Iran, and their various satellites and allies such as Venezuela and North Korea. On the other side is a loose collection of democracies, European Union, America, Canada, probably India, Australia, and Japan, and whichever allies will come to our side. Yeah, we're in a new era of Cold War. So what does this mean? Well, firstly, defence budgets will go up. So Germany just announced a 100 billion euro increase in its defence budgets. The age where we used to mock NATO for not reaching their 2% GDP defence budgets will be something we just look back on fondly. Australia's defence budget is 2.2% of GDP. I expect it will go up. And this affects more money on tanks, planes and drones is less money on schools, hospitals and infrastructure. Another thing is inflation will be here to stay. So we're going through an inflationary spiral at the moment. Some of it is temporary. So the supply chain shocks that have affected the West or the world through COVID, that theoretically will sort itself out as democracies, as economies open up. The monetary stimulus response to COVID, theoretically we can rein that back in with monetary tightening. And of course the oil shock from the Ukraine war is theoretically going to find new supplies. Those things are theoretically temporary, but the decoupling of economies that are likely to take place during a Cold War, that won't be temporary. That will be locked into the system. So globalizations and the tying in of global markets is really good for cheap products. So, you know, China make great phones because they do it cheap. That means it's less for us. America produce great software and whatever. Australia produces cheap and safe resources and that sort of thing. That makes global products and services cheaper. If there's going to be a decoupling of the global economy, we're going to lose those efficiencies. And it might be necessary for security. Who wants rare earth minerals only produced in China at the moment? Well, okay, let's diversify it. But if Australia makes it, Canada makes it, it's probably going to be more expensive. Climate and energy policy will have to change. Western approach to climate change policy has been completely incoherent. Our policy is we don't like fossil fuels, fair enough, contributing to climate change. So let's make it difficult to produce it in the West. Prices inevitably go up and go, well, we don't like that either. Maybe we'll just import it from other people who are, of course, dictatorships who are now our enemies, such as Russia, Iran, and Venezuela. It makes no sense. We have to rethink climate change policy. It doesn't help the climate to burn fossil fuels produced by Vladimir Putin rather than by BHP or someone else. It doesn't help the climate, but it certainly does cause international problems. We'll have to have a think about that. Wrap up quickly. We're in a new era of instability and it could be quite dangerous. If you had to look at the debt ratios of developed or the leading powers during the Second World War, would have gone something like that. First World War, Second World War, and now if someone based on that information alone said, do you reckon there was another world war in the 21st century? I said, yeah, it went really high there. In fact, it's been going on for ages, probably from about 2008. So since the GFC, we've massively increased our debt in the West. COVID meant we had to double down on that to stimulate our economies. Global finances are very unstable. What if there's something else around the corner? What if there's another war? What if there's a Pi variant after the Omicron variant of COVID-19, which is worse than the others? We have very little financial room to be able to react. And I think we're probably going to see some failed states, and we might be seeing that in Sri Lanka at the moment, who are facing a finance crisis. I expect more of this sort of thing. Final comment, militarily, what we're seeing in Ukraine, it's probably going to be the last major war where tanks and aircraft play a major role. We're seeing tanks complete fodder to cheaper man-portable weapons, and the Russian Air Force has disappeared from the skies. We're going to be seeing more man-portable weapons and drones. Now, this will actually increase the risk of really dangerous wars into the future. And just to explain why, I'll leave you with 3 words. Read my book. Available in all good bookstores online. I have a website, www.warstory.com. You can look at it there, or www.hybridpublishers.com.au, or you can email me and I can send you.
Excellent. Thank you. We've got a few questions for you, John. That was a brilliant presentation and scary. one of the questions is just around the sanctions and how that has played out as a means that other countries that haven't been, involved have got involved. Is it effective? Has it worked? And long term, what are its implications for
the history of sanctions has not been a good one as far as really achieving outcomes. I mean, the West has been sanctioning Cuba for about 7 years or something like that. It hasn't changed their government. Having said that, I was shocked by the depth of these sanctions and by the agreement, at least in the West. It certainly seems to be doing damage to the Russian economy, maybe affecting their ability to certainly wage one of those long wars. But the history of sanctions is, what it tends to do is it can actually, it's the people that suffer, not the dictators in their ivory tower. And in fact, in some situations, it can actually strengthen the dictator's power because they have the power to monopolise wheat and grain and whatever, and the people become completely subservient on their government. So the history of sanctions is not a good one. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, because you absolutely need them to suffer some consequences of doing this. But I don't see it necessarily producing a clear-cut outcome.
And last one, which I'm very interested in, your journey. You're an author now. For as long as I've known you, high-achieving lawyer specialising in tax-related affairs, and now you're writing, fantastic, novels. Is this the one of many? What happens for yourself going forward?
I am thinking of writing one called The Next Big War.
Yeah.
Look, military history has been a real fascination of mine ever since I was a child. I actually talk about it a little bit in the book about hearing stories from my grandfather, who was a veteran who fought in the New Guinea campaign during the Second World War. It's always been, some people read fashion magazines, binge watch Netflix. I tend to read books about war and military history. One day I read a book and I thought, you know what, I reckon I could have wrote that better. And I thought, I think I'm going to write a book. It's completely a hobby. And I was really enjoying doing it. And I found a publisher, lovely people at Hybrid Publishers, a Melbourne-based publishing firm, who were willing to publish it. And so that was really, it was only ever a hobby, but sort of coincided with some sort of personal reasons for wanting to step back from the law a little bit. I'm still working the Velocity Legal on a slightly reduced basis. It was sort of the moons aligned that I'd finished this book and looking to make a step back from the law. So it gave me some opportunities to publicise it and talk about it at events like this. And fortunately, the Ukraine war came along, and every one of my assumptions in the final chapter is coming true exactly according to plan.
That's great. A variation to the book. Do you add a final chapter about, in 6 months' time, say what's happened with the Ukraine war?
Yeah, well, I actually do think. We're entering a new stage, and of history. The unipolar moment is over, and we're re-entering one of geopolitical competition. But that's been the usual state of affairs throughout history. And so I actually, if I was to write a follow-up on this to take into some of the accounts of Ukraine and stuff, it would be how those geopolitical contests tend to pan out. And people tend to forgotten, thinking, America's the policeman of the world, and that's all I've needed to worry about. Well, for the thousands of years prior to that, the sorts of scenario we're living in now. So writing about that and putting it into a modern context.
Fantastic. Thank you, John. Thank you, Brent, today. Thank you. We've got one question, sorry.
Just one quick question in regard to what you're putting there as the next phase. Do you want to comment on the fault lines in Formosa, Taiwan?
Yeah, well, that's one of the scenarios where it could be another shock to the financial system. The West has sanctioned Russia heavily. Are we going to do that to China? I think during the Second World War, it was a period of what's called great man theory of history. You know, is the Second World War conceivable without Hitler? If Hitler hadn't become a dictator of Germany, would that war have even happened? The Soviet Union have won without Russia, without Stalin. Would Britain have stayed in the war without Churchill? We're back to a period where the whims of individuals are going to determine this. I mean, the decision to go into Ukraine was one person's. And people say, well, how couldn't we predict this? It's one person. No one can read his mind other than him. And unfortunately, what happens in the Taiwan Strait is a decision of one person, Xi Jinping, and he has said that this is an issue that I will not allow to pass to future generations. Now that's a red line. That's saying I'm going to deal with this one way or another. I can tell you the Taiwanese aren't going to do it voluntarily. They've got no interest in, socialism with Chinese characteristics. They're a vibrant capitalist democracy. I feel it's almost inevitable that it's going to happen. I'll tell you when in the next one.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you, John. Cheers for that. Yes, thank you. Well, just to show the variation of our speakers now, we're going to talk a little bit of insolvency. So thank you, John. So if you do have any questions throughout the time, please forward them to us and we'll pass them on to John and Brent. How we finish today is something close to our hearts, and it's basically insolvency law. We've only got a short amount of time. I'm conscious that we're coming up to 1 o'clock, but we're talking about the small business restructures that have implemented early last year, really haven't kicked off nationally, but basically there hasn't been a change in the insolvency space for many years. We're talking about 30 years with the introduction of voluntary administration, but with the small business restructures, a formal insolvency appointment that deals with doing deals with creditors. We're excited by it. We were excited by it very early on, hence we're probably the leading, we are the leading insolvency firm that have done small business restructures, and so we've set up a division, and Cassandra Risteska is basically our leader of our small business restructuring team, and we've got her talking about it today. So thank you, Cassandra. Thank you.
Thank you, Brent. Thanks, everyone. It's nice to be back in person presenting as opposed to on Zoom looking staring into a camera. But yeah, my name is Cassandra. I'm a manager at Rodgers Reidy, and I head up the small business restructuring team. So when we think of a global pandemic, restrictions and supply chain disruptions and how it may affect small businesses, we would assume that the number of liquidations and other insolvency appointments would be extremely high. Surprisingly, this hasn't been the case with COVID-19 pandemic. The main reason why is because to date, the ATO and the banks haven't been applying pressure to business owners. But from all reports, this is all suspected to change after the federal election come May. We are already seeing winding up applications recommencing across the nation. In February alone, there were 92 winding up applications filed throughout Australia. The main industries at risk are tourism, hospitality, brick and mortar, retail and construction. To combat the expected surge of insolvency appointments, on 1 January 2021, the federal government enacted new restructuring laws for eligible small businesses, known as the Small Business Restructure regime. The objective of the small business restructure process is to keep businesses trading and to avoid liquidation. It also provides directors and company the time to put forward a plan to creditors to pay their liabilities at an amount less than 100 cents in the dollar, all while retaining control of the company under the supervision of an SBR restructuring practitioner. It is important to note that some issues are not so grave as to lead a small business into liquidation, while others may benefit from a formal SBR process. The beauty of the SBR process is that a moratorium begins when the restructuring practitioner is appointed. This means that unsecured creditors and some secured creditors are prohibited from taking action against the company and enforcing personal guarantees. It gives the company some breathing space to develop a plan that will provide for the continuation of the business and the best return to creditors given its financial circumstances. So now let's move on to the SBR eligibility requirements. So you need to consider, is the company insolvent or likely to become insolvent? Are tax lodgements and obligations up to date? Are employee entitlements up to date? Are the liabilities less than $1 million, excluding employee entitlements? Further, has the company or the director of the company been involved in a simplified liquidation or small business restructure in the preceding 7 years? And finally, is the entity incorporated under the Corporations Act? This last point leads to quite a few questions from accountants, that question being if a corporate trustee of a trust is eligible for the SBR process. The answer simply is yes, subject to meeting the other eligibility requirements. So initiating the SBR process is relatively easy. Firstly, we at Rodgers Reidy will assist you and your client to determine whether they are eligible for the SBR process. If they are eligible, the company must pass a resolution that the company is insolvent or likely to become insolvent and that a restructuring practitioner should be appointed. And finally, the company then appoints an SBR restructuring practitioner to oversee the restructuring process and to help develop a restructuring plan. The SBR process itself has two distinct phases. The first being the restructuring phase, which begins upon the appointment of the restructuring practitioner. The restructuring practitioner assists the company to prepare its restructuring plan, which is circulated to the company's creditors generally within the first 20 business days of appointment. In preparing the restructuring plan, the restructuring practitioner will conduct his or her investigations into the company's affairs and will determine what a likely return will be in a hypothetical liquidation scenario. Before finalising the plan, we, at Rodgers Reidy, the restructuring practitioner, will liaise with the major creditors, generally the ATOs being the major creditor throughout all the SBR appointments we've done. We'll liaise with them to ensure that the return and the terms of the proposed plan are acceptable, and if it's likely to be accepted, should it be proposed. Creditors then generally have approximately 15 business days to accept the plan, which is put forward to by the company. The second phase of the restructuring process is the restructuring plan. This occurs should creditors accept the restructuring plan put forward, and then the restructuring practitioner manages the requirements as set out in the plan, which can include paying distributions to the creditors. The beauty of the SBR process is that whilst the restructuring practitioner oversees the debt restructuring and plan, the company's directors remain in control of the business and can continue trading. So now let's move on to a case study of a company that's gone through the small business restructuring process. It's in the construction industry. This particular company operated in the production and installation of steel frames in Victoria and continued to trade during the restructuring period. The director attributed the failure of the company to the global steel shortage, the increase in the cost of materials, and the level of fixed costs during a period of reduction in revenue. The first two are both factors largely related to COVID-19. The unsecured creditors at appointment was approximately $380,000, whilst the ATO, being the largest creditor, had a debt of $320,000. The company had cash at bank, motor vehicles, and substantial debtors and retentions. However, none of these were available under the proposed restructuring plan. The restructuring practitioner's investigations identified potential unreasonable director-related transactions, an unfair preference claim, and an insolvent trading claim, which may be available to a liquidator in a hypothetical liquidation scenario. The proposal provided by the company was for approximately $75,000 to be available to unsecured creditors, being a return of approximately 19 cents in the dollar after related parties elected not to participate in any dividends. This proposal provided a better outcome for unsecured creditors than in a hypothetical liquidation, noting that in a hypothetical liquidation scenario, there would be a significant amount of employee creditors which crystallise upon the company being placed into liquidation. Creditors voted in favour of the restructuring proposal, and following the process, the director was able to carry on the business without the significant debt levels and without the cost of or burden of the company being placed into a voluntary administration to reach the same outcome. So when we look at this particular scenario, the major creditor being the ATO and all the other creditors, they accepted to write off approximately 80 cents in the dollar of their claim. So the company is now in a position that it can continue trading on into the future without these legacy debts restricting its ability to trade. So too often, we are brought in far too late once an issue has been identified with the company. So if you do have any questions about the SBR process, or if your client is eligible and how they may benefit, please contact us. As I said, I head up the SBR team, and we have a great team with us assisting. And Brent, thanks, Brent.
Thanks, Cassandra. Thank you. We've got a couple of questions that have just come through. ATO support. What's the ATO view on these? Are they supporting them, or are they?
So the ATO, they want to support businesses. They want to see them continue to trade without facing any other insolvency events. The ATO aren't too concerned about the cents in the dollar return. It's more about the story. Why is the company in the position it is now? Generally, those affected by COVID, tourism, hospitality, they've all been hit hard as a result of the lockdowns. And the ATO want to know, what is the company doing next so it doesn't be the same fate going down in the future. So that's where we work together with the company and with the accountants to try to paint a picture to the tax office.
Okay. And what about businesses that have ceased and there's a residual tax debt? The ATO formed, are they going to support those?
So the ATO haven't formed a view just yet. We are currently doing a small business restructure. We're the first ones to do it where the company hasn't been trading. So the ATO have their in-house legal counsel assisting them on this matter. It's a wait and see, but what's the difference with a voluntary administration DOCA that, same situation, the company is no longer trading. What's the difference to that? At least in a small business restructure, the ATO will get it, and the other creditors will get a return better than they would in a hypothetical liquidation. So watch this space, but I have confidence, or I'm hopeful that they will vote in favour of.
And so unlike a voluntary administration where an administrator gets appointed, takes control of the company and the affairs, the employees and so forth, this regime, you don't get involved in the trading?
No. So that stays with the company's director.
Bank account, do you?
No, we don't seize anything. Everything stays, it's in control. The company and the director have control of all the assets.
Yep.
We're just here essentially in the background negotiating the debt with the creditors. That's all we really do. The only time we will get involved is if there's a transaction that's outside the ordinary course of business, say there's a major asset, they're trying to sell it off, it's not part of the plan. That's when the company and the director will require the restructuring practitioner's consent, but otherwise very limited involvement on our end, and that's how we can keep the costs down as opposed to a voluntary administration where take control and there's more liability, but there's liability on the administrator.
Correct.
It's completely different in the small business restructuring space.
Great. And finally, it is getting used. I mean, how many are we seeing? I sort of said at the start, I know the answer to this, but with 1st of Jan last year. So
there's been about 40, and
right.
we've done almost 25% of that 40, and we've had great results for the companies that have been involved in that. The ATO and other major creditors have accepted, and they've been able to continue trading and without these legacy debts holding them back.
Yep. Last one, what have they rejected? The ATO, I mean.
So we do know the ATO rejected two plans put forward by other insolvency practitioners, and the first one being there was a history of non-compliance by the company. They failed to lodge their returns over a period of years and weren't making any payments. And the other one was, it was a payment plan over the maximum 3 years. The restructuring practitioner wasn't able to provide accurate or adequate forecasting.
Right. Okay. Excellent. Thank you for that, Cassandra. Thank you very much. No, we've got one question.
It's probably a bit aligned to that. It says the take-up of SBR has been underwhelming to date. Do you see these numbers increasing in the future, or does the process need to be reviewed?
What about the figure? Do you think $1 million is enough?
I think it's a bit low when considering that includes all liabilities except your employee entitlements and contingent liabilities. Not a lot of entities fall into that space.
Yep.
So if that was to increase, but I think it's also the knowledge around the benefits of the process itself. That's still lacking given there have been many. So hopefully with more education around it, we've seen great results. So more people should benefit from it.
And I think what we'll see, the uptake will increase just because once the ATO puts pressure on. I mean, at the moment, we've got a federal election coming in less than 2 months, and so they've held back, but that's going to change. I mean, as we said before, it's plus $60 billion in arrears out to the ATO. They're going to have to recover soon, and they're either get paid, go through an SBR liquidation. There's so many ways that they will try to enforce, and this is a good way of doing it. So I think that will increase in time once there's a lot more pressure. There's just no pressure at the moment. So watch the space, I would say. Very good. Thank you, Cassandra. Thank you very much for that. Excellent. Well, that's it for this time. Appreciate everyone sort of clicking in. We had some fantastic numbers and some great questions. Once again, if there are any particular topics that people would like us to talk on, feel free to email us. The SBR stuff that Cassandra spoke is on our website. John's book, he will provide a link on our YouTube channel, so you can get in contact with John. And if you're CPAs, you've got Brent to admire for the next,
Come and annoy me.
Come and annoy him. So thank you very much again. We appreciate it, and until next time, thank you very much.